Is it recording? We're gonna have another book video. Tato has an ear infection and he had to go to the vet today. Welcome back to another video. Yes, I'm talking to you. Today we're getting back into the books. I have noticed that recently I've been reading so many standalone novels, and not just have I been reading standalone novels, I have been reading really good standalone novels. And I thought, why not share these with the public? Because something that I do as a fantasy reader, and I feel like a lot of other people will agree with this, is I get myself roped into series that have maybe like 5 parts and will not be finished in like another 20 years. Maybe not 20 years. Let's say 10 years. 5 years if we're lucky, 1 year for each book, but we're probably not that lucky. Anyway, the bottom line is I feel like I'm always reading unfinished stories. And I didn't think anything of it because that's just the nature of fantasy oftentimes, is you're reading really long things. And a lot of new books that come out that are really popular are unfinished stories. And so I'm reading the first book, the second book, and then I'm waiting. I'm reading the third book and I'm waiting. I forgot how nice it can be to read a story that comes to an end. It's so nice. It's very comforting, and lately just reading these standalone novels that come to an end in one book, which I feel like it wasn't that I had a prejudice against standalone novels, but because I loved the really long, intense, overly complicated stories and world building and stuff that often comes in those long fantasy novels, I think I was beginning to think lowly of standalone novels, and boy was I wrong. Boy was I wrong. Also, I feel like standalone novels are a really great way to get out of reading slumps. That's why I've titled this video the title that I have titled it, because oftentimes if you're in a reading slump and then you pick up a book that you really like, but it's part of this huge series that's unfinished, I feel like it can kind of revamp the reading slump. Like you're like, I just want to read this story. I don't want to go back to other stories. And I think standalones are such a great way to get you back out of that reading slump, because you're getting into a good story and you're finishing that story. You're feeling this sense of fulfillment, completion from just one book. And then you can go on and do that again. Or, go back to your fantasies, whatever you want. So today I'm going to be sharing a good handful of novels that I have read recently. The majority of them are fantasy romance. Some of them are historical romance. And I think we have a paranormal romance in there as well. So just, romance of different varieties. I hope you guys enjoy this video. So let's go ahead and get into it. The very first book we're talking about is Bring Me Your Midnight by Rachel Griffin. I listened to this book on Audible, and I do not recommend it as an audiobook because the recording is quite poor. The book is good though, and I mean the fact that the recording was so poor and I was still able to listen to the whole book and enjoy it, I think says something for the book, because the audio recording is not good. It's just the bad quality audio is the bottom line. But anyway, so Bring Me Your Midnight by Rachel Griffin. It follows a girl named Tana, which is short for Mortana, and she is a witch who lives on this island of witches. The only thing is they're not what you would totally expect of witches. They are witches who live under a new reform, is what they call it, and basically they've given up a lot of their ability to perform magic, mainly so that they can kind of fit in with non-witch folk, or they call them mainlanders because all of just like the normal humans live on the mainland, and the witches have kind of been all pushed off to this island where they live in seclusion because of this really bad history they had where humans were trying to kill off the witches, kind of, Salem witch trial stuff, that kind of thing. In order to fit in with the humans and kind of like appeal to them, they've given up their really, really strong magic, and they can only practice very low magic, which mainly involves like making items slightly more magical. So our main character, Tana, works in a perfume shop, and she infuses magic into the perfume so that not only when you smell the perfumes you get like a nice smell, you also can like experience a feeling. And so, but it's that kind of thing everywhere. You could also get tea or cheese that I guess makes you feel certain ways. I don't know. But anyway, that's the basis of Mortana and this island that she lives in. By coincidence, she meets another witch who's living on this island. Although I don't know if he'd be a witch. He'd be a wizard, I think. I feel like they didn't call him a wizard in the book, though. I feel like they called him a witch. And he is from, like, a secret society among the people who live on this island that even the witches on the island don't know about them. And they still practice high magic. And he basically tricks her into not giving up. As I'm explaining this, I'm realizing it's kind of a complicated storyline. So anyway, once a month, in order to get rid of the really large amount of magic that these witches have, they have like excess magic since they only use low magic. In order to get rid of all this excess high magic that they're not going to use, they basically deposit it into the ocean. They just kind of throw it up, and there's a lot of consequences for this happening as well, which the book talks about. But anyway, this guy who still practices the high magic meets Mortana and basically screws her over, and she misses her chance to dispose of her excess magic. And she knows that if she has all of this magic built up inside of her and she doesn't use it, there's a possibility that she could die. And so she has to figure out how to not die. There is also within this story an arranged marriage plot. Mortana is supposed to be arranged to be married with the governor's son from the mainland. So she's supposed to marry a non-witch man, and it's supposed to be a sign of the witches and the normal humans getting along, and and it's gonna be a really good thing. And this is like her whole purpose, is to marry off to this guy in the mainland. But then of course things start getting complicated when she meets this high magic dude, because coincidentally he's also really hot, and so there's that. Makes things complicated. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. In the beginning, I didn't think I would. And yeah, in the beginning, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna like this. Plus, the audio quality was really poor. But then as the story kept going on, I was getting like really interested. And especially because I was like, I feel like this writer is making this really complicated and fantastical, deep world building plot thing going on. And then how is she going to end it in one book? Like, how is that possible? And then she did. She wrapped it all up nicely, and I liked how everything ended. This book I gave a 4.5 out of 5, and the chili pepper rating is a 0.5 out of 5, because there is a spicy-ish scene, if you want to call it that, but it's really not very spicy at all. But it's a very good read. I do recommend. Okay, cool. The next book we're talking about is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I talked about this book once before. It's a very good book. It is like one of my favorite books that I've read this year, actually. And it is a part of a series of books called Regency Fairy Tales. And if you're familiar with Bridgerton, you're familiar with the Regency era and all of the rules and stuff of high society for a woman to get married and not ever be alone with a man in the process. It makes for fun writing and reading, I think. And so basically, this story follows a girl named Theodora, and she only has half of a soul because a fairy stole half of her soul when she was young. And now, because she only has half a soul, she's a very awkward person who doesn't understand social graces and how to be a part of society at all, has to try to live in this Regency era where people are trying to get married. It's a very fun read. I read this book so quick because it's also a very short read, and the love story is just the kind that just makes you so happy and smiley, and I love these kinds of books. They just warm my heart. So this book is a 4.9 out of 5. The only reason it's not a 5 out of 5 is because there is no spicy scenes in it. That's right, everybody. It's a 0 out of 5 chili peppers. Boy, I wish it wasn't. And that is exactly why it's a 4.9. I rated it. I couldn't give it a 5.5 because there's tension between the characters. Like, you want something to happen, but then nothing does happen. And so that's like, oh, come on, just do it. Okay, so the next book we're going to be talking about is Sorcery of Thorns. A Sorcery of Thorns. I think, actually, there's an A in front of it. By Margaret Robinson. I also listened to the audio of this book, and it is better than others. It's not a bad audio. I think I still would have preferred to read this book, though. I have heard really good things about this book. I don't know if it's 100% my cup of tea, and I think that may just be me, but I think other people could still really enjoy this book. Like I said, I've heard some really great reviews. The bottom line is that I wanted to like this book, I think, and then I just couldn't fully, So in The Sorcery of Thorns, it follows our main character, who is a girl named Elizabeth. And this is the part that made me want to like the book. It's that she grew up in a magical library. And don't we just all wish we could have grown up in a magical library? Like, that sounds awesome. And what do you mean by magical? Basically, think of that book from Harry Potter, the one that's like, and all of the books in this library are not books, but they are grimoires, and they all have magic in them. And because of that, they all are like alive to some degree, which is really cool. It's a super cool idea to be like in this library of books that are alive. And so our main character, Elizabeth, was orphaned and then left at the doorstep of this magical library, and then she was raised there. She is in training to become a warden, and the warden's job basically is to protect the books because, sorcery is a very dangerous thing, and so not everybody is supposed to be getting involved in sorcery, first off. And second off, if these books, these magical books, are damaged to any degree, they could become what's called a malefict. And that's basically like the book turns into this monster that could kill people. And so the job of the warden is then to stop the malefict from, escaping the library and causing harms to others. The beginning of the book follows Elizabeth as a malefict escapes this library that she has grown up in, and she has to try to kill this malefict before it can hurt other people. But oddly enough, she's the only person who woke up to this malefict making any noise making noise in the library, which is a strange thing. So she kills the malefict, but then because she's the only person who woke up and the only person that saw the malefict, she gets wrongly accused that she set the malefict free, which she didn't, but they don't know who did. And it's not easy to sneak into a great library, and yeah. Anyway, so because of this, she ends up getting taken away to the capital city by a charming young man who is a sorcerer. She's going to be put on trial, basically. This never happens, but this is the beginning of a very long and complicated story that I feel like just goes so many different directions. And it's hard to give an overview of this story without just like telling you everything and like spoiling the whole book, because what I've told you doesn't really give a great explanation of what's happening. Basically, she gets to the city and she finds out that there is a bad man doing bad things in these great libraries, and she has to stop them. And with the help of her sorcerer friend, who is a very traumatized young lad. I think there are so many aspects of this book that is such a good idea. The libraries was such a good idea, and I honestly wish that there was more things happening in the libraries. I feel like she could have just stayed in a great library, and there could have been a whole story plot that happened within a library. And she didn't have to leave and go to the capital city and experience the world and politics surrounding around sorcerers. I feel like there's so many books that kind of talk about the politics of how magic works in a society and how, it can really mess up a society. It can mess things up for people and put people in charge because magic and power. And it's a story that's been done a lot. But I haven't read a story before that takes place in a magical library. And so a part of me just wanted her to stay there and for the story to take place there instead of her leaving and kind of occasionally visiting them. Like I said, this book has a lot of very intricate plot lines with lots of small details. And I guess in that way, it's fun. And again, I wonder if I had read this book, if I would have had a better time. So what wasn't good about the book? Because I think I've been giving it some honestly good reviews at this point. What wasn't good about the book was the characters. Also, there was quite a few plot holes in there. Some very large ones, actually, that were like gaping at me. But I'm not going to talk about those because it's a spoiler. But I think the number one thing that I didn't like was the characters. Elizabeth is supposed to be like this really smart person, but she acts really dumb a lot of the time. And I don't like that. And it's not like she acts ditzy. Like she's just really, really misinformed. And I don't know how you can be like, is she 20? I don't know how you can be like 18, 19, 20 and really be this misinformed. Like she's supposed to be sheltered. I get that. I think that's supposed to be the idea. She's sheltered so she doesn't know anything about sorcerers. But literally everybody else in the world, including the people that she works with at this library, all know that sorcerers don't actually eat orphans and widows and stuff like that. But she was told these stories as like a child and she still believes them. I don't know. There was just a lot of things that didn't really add up. And I think that is maybe what frustrated me the most. And Nathaniel, the male lead, he's supposed to be snarky. And I think it's really hard to write an attractive, snarky character. Maybe it's not really hard. Maybe some people just try too hard. Like literally everything he says is like a snarky, aren't I funny and quirky? He annoyed the crap out of me, in all honesty. And I couldn't like root for the love to happen because of it. Okay, so I've kind of gone downhill. This whole video is supposed to be talking about books that get you out of a reading slump, not a book that's going to frustrate you. Anyway, okay, so like I said, some people really like this book, and there are good things about this book, but I had some issues with it, obviously. And so that is A Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Robinson, and let's move on. But before we move on, I still need to give my rating. So my rating is 2.5 out of 5, which I promise you guys is actually the lowest rating I've given any of these books. And anyway, so 2.5 out of 5 and a 0 out of 5 because there is no spicy scenes, and you don't want them to be anyway because it's just not, there's not enough pull between the characters. So it would have been an awkward sexy scene if there had been one. Anyway, moving on. So the next book we're talking about is Portrait of a Scotsman by Evie Dunmore. And can I just say that I love Evie Dunmore? I do not read enough historical fiction. I don't read enough of it. Like, every time I read a historical romance fiction. Sorry, that's important. Romance should be in there, not just any old historical fiction. That could get boring. Sorry to people who like that. I don't read enough of it because every time I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, so good. And so this book is very good, but this book is even better. And I read this book a long time ago, so I will not be talking about it today. But Bringing Down the Duke was probably a 5-star read for me. I read it a few years ago. It's also by Evie Dunmore. All of these books, I think there's more in the series that I have not read. They follow these different girls that are a part of a women's rights group back in the, I wonder what time period this is, 1800 something. 1879. So around that time period, 1879. It's a group of friends who go to Oxford in England, obviously, and they are women's rights activists, and they're falling in love with attractive men. And it's really fun to read about. And so the books are not necessarily like a series. Just because you read one doesn't mean you can read the other. The story in itself is all in one book. But if you like them, it's really nice because you can kind of revisit old characters that you've already read about in the books. And I like when writers do that. So we're going to talk about Portrait of a Scotsman now. So this book follows Harriet. Her name is Harriet, and she is an artist at Oxford. She's a painter, and she has dyslexia, which is not very relevant, but I haven't read a lot of characters who are represented in books with dyslexia, so I like to add that in there. Even though she's an activist, and I think this is fun in the book because she kind of comes to a self-realization. Even though she's an activist, she's lived a very comfortable life and hasn't really had anything working against her in society despite being a woman, because she has lived very comfortably and her family is taking good care of her and are very respectful of her desire to want to go to Oxford, until she gets roped in to a marriage with this very sexy Scotsman who is a notorious kind of bad guy. He is a rich man, but he is not from old money. He's kind of made his way in the world, and he's notorious for making his way in dirty ways, kind of taking advantage of people, pushing people under the bus, and kind of getting there. He has a very bad reputation. They meet, and there is a misunderstanding that she has come to his house because she is a prostitute. And so their first meeting is very fun because she is not a prostitute, but he's under that impression. And then after he realizes who she is, a daughter of like a wealthy man who is from older money, he decides that he is going to trick her into a marriage with him because he wants to be married to somebody who's from older money, because having a wife that is from a lineage like that is going to kind of give him a better standing in society. So initially it's kind of for politics, the reason that he kind of tricks her into this marriage. And she finally is feeling, because her parents can't help her and all this stuff, they're like, no, you have to marry this man, even though he's a bad man and you don't want to marry him, you have to marry him. And so she feels like very trapped, and suddenly like the society that was very comfortable for her before, it's like so alarmingly real why she needs to be an activist for the things that she's been an activist for. And so it is a little bit of a hate to love type romance, and it's just a very fun read. I'd say the only thing that is not that good about this book is that after the characters officially get together, the side story, you know how in a lot of romance novels there's like a side plot, or there's a romance plot and then there's some other plot happening, right? And sometimes one can be bigger than the other. In this book, obviously the romance plot is larger than the side plot, which happens. And unfortunately, once the romance kind of comes to a conclusion, that side plot was not so exciting for me. Like, I wasn't enjoying reading that part as much. I kind of wanted to end it once the romance came to a conclusion. And the writer works with it. It's still a very good book. Like I said, Bringing Down the Duke, I think, is better, but this one is still good. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and it is a 3 out of 5 chili peppers. And, that's kind of like the sweet spot for me. I think 3 out of 5 is where I like my books to be. Once it gets more than that is when it starts, I'm reading the books for different reasons. So 3 out of 5 is like a sweet spot for me. And I think Evie Dunmore does such a good job of mixing like tension for her love interests, like actual sex happening, as well as a side plot that is interesting. She does a really good job of all 3 of those, and I honestly want to go and read all the other books that are about the girls in here. Okay, so the next book that we're going to be talking about is called Wolf Gone Wild by Juliette Cross. I have an old grocery list in here. I'm just going to leave that there for me to find some other time. Basically, I saw this book on Amazon and I bought it as an impulse purchase to kind of hearken to those days when I used to read Wattpad novels about werewolves. Some part of me was like, man, I used to really, really enjoy that. And I wonder if I can find that same kind of enjoyment in a book. that's more well written. Because to be honest with you, it's not very often anymore, but I used to go back to those Wattpad semi-regularly to see if I could still get the same excitement that I got when I was like a teenager. And often the low quality writing puts me off of it. And so I don't enjoy it like I used to. But now I was like, well, maybe this can be my compromise. And I'm going to say that, yes, it was my compromise. Because it's a nice little werewolf story that gets kind of spicy, and it was enjoyable. So this takes place in modern day, and I think that this technically is a paranormal romance, or maybe it's a shifter romance. I don't know what the category would be. He is a shifter if he's a werewolf. It follows, it's a dual perspective book that follows Mateo, who is a werewolf. He cannot turn into his werewolf form anymore. And because of that, the wolf that usually comes out once a month when he's on his wolf period is living inside his head rent-free and being an annoying ass grumpy wolf. His wolf time of the month is basically when all of his wolfly urges come out, where he's gotta, beat a bunch of stuff up and sex a bunch of stuff up. And now, since he can't have that, I think it's at this point when the book begins, it's been like 4 months that he hasn't become a wolf. He just has this wolf-like voice living in his head, and you get to read that wolf voice all the time, being like, go punch that guy in the face, or man, that lady's got some nice boobs. And at first I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but then as I got into it, I enjoyed it. And so he is really stressed out about this. He's like, I think I'm gonna go crazy because this wolf is going crazy in my head. And he could. So he is looking for a witch who can help break this. He thinks it's a hex that's been put on him. And so he finds this witch who is a notorious hex breaker. They live in, I think they're in New Orleans. She's a part of this family of witches who are in New Orleans, and it's a big group of sisters, and they all have different special witchy powers, basically. And so he meets this girl named Evie, who is a hex breaker. And I struggled a little bit with Evie's character. I wondered if she was a pick-me girl. But you know what? I just decided to like her. And I decided, I'm not going to judge what she likes and what she doesn't like. And I'm not going to put a title on her and say she's a pick-me girl or she's not. I did think it was funny, though. I think you can tell that even though this is like a modern day romance, I think this book came out this year. It's really new. So 2023. You can tell that it's written by an older woman because they're watching DVDs and stuff. And I think some of the lingo and things are just by an older woman, even though the characters are modern day. And it didn't bother me, but I guess it could bother some people. The tension between the characters was still really fun, and the side story was also really fun. A lot of the characters that were introduced were very fun and relatable, and yeah, it's not, like I said before, a lot of times when a book is in modern times, I'm kind of I don't know if I'm going to like it. And again, I was pleasantly surprised that I did enjoy it. And yeah, it definitely scratched that itch for me. That was my old Wattpad werewolf days. And maybe some of you guys also have that and you want to check it out. So I think that there are going to be more books in this series that are similar to what we just talked about in Portrait of a Scotsman, because I suspect that, because there's a bunch of different witches in this family, I suspect that each one of them is going to have their own book where they can fall in love with maybe some different kind of paranormal creature. Am I saying the right thing? Like vampire, other witch, another werewolf, that kind of thing. I had fun reading this book. It's a very easy read. And let's see, what did I give it? A 3.5 out of 5 stars. And it's a 3 out of 5 chili peppers too, so just right in that sweet spot. And the next book is called The Weaver and the Witch Queen, and it is by Genevieve Gornichec. I think that's how you say her name. And I also listened to this book as an audiobook, and it is mwah. It's a very good audiobook. The writer or the reader does a very good job. The audio quality is very good. I also specifically this book takes place in I want to say 8th century Norway. And so there's a lot of Norwegian words that are used, and like the characters often like will speak the occasional Norwegian word, and it's obvious that the person reading this book knows how to correctly pronounce those words. And so I had so much fun listening to these like words in Norwegian and like trying to copy how she said them and stuff. It was very fun. I felt like I was learning a language as I was reading the book, which is like, I'm a linguist and that is something I love to do. So not everybody may enjoy that. But anyway, I think that anybody who listens to the audio book though could agree that it is a good audio reading. And so The Weaver and the Witch Queen is another historical romance. The romance, I'd say though, is a side plot and it's more of a historical fiction type story. So not a genre I am always reading. I did go and read some reviews on this book that just to kind of get an idea of how other people were feeling about this book. And I think there's some people who agree that if you want like a Viking era story, you could go to like other writers. That Genevieve Gornichec is the best, but I honestly really enjoy this book, and maybe it's because I'm not like a scholar in Viking era Norway, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of people who are. I mean, this is probably a good handful, but I wouldn't say your average person is. So if you're like me and you know just a little bit about Viking era Norway, I think you'll enjoy this. I will say though, while I'm thinking about it, I have read another Viking book that is a standalone novel that is really good. It was a while ago that I read this though, and it's called Sky in the Deep, and I will put this up here. I highly recommend that book too. If you're into the Viking stuff, definitely read that. It's a standalone and it's a little spicy. It's very good. But anyway, we're gonna stay on track here with Weaver and the Witch Queen. So it follows these two girls. One is a weaver and one is a witch, interestingly enough. Basically, there's these two girls and then there's a third girl who is their like best friend. They become sworn sisters when they're young, and a fortune teller tells them that their future is clouded by the decisions of each other, basically. One of these girls, the one who's neither a witch queen or a weaver, goes missing. She's taken by these bad witches, basically, and the two other girls are like, we have to go and find her. So in order to go and find her, they make deals with this group of Vikings who happen to be passing by at the time, so they can go and try to find this girl. And one of the Vikings is the future king of Norway, of course, and he is a notoriously ruthless guy. Our witch, whose name is Gunhild, is bound to fall in love with this man whose name is Eirik. They have a really fun enemies to lovers romance, and I did find myself at times a little annoyed by Gunhild's personality, but I felt like in the end her personality was consistent. She was stubborn to a fault, but it was her, and I don't know. I think a character could be stubborn to a fault and it can be very annoying, but it was like stubborn to a fault, and then you get why she is that way. You know, you're like, I get it though, it's Gunhild, you know? Anyway, it was very good. The characters were written really well. I felt like I was very much immersed in this 8th century Norway or whenever it was based. I thought it was very fun to follow these two different girls' points of views as they're both falling in love and kind of struggling to make their way in the world. I liked reading about Norway because I feel like I'm often reading like books that take place in England or Scotland and stuff like that. And so I get to learn a lot about that type of history where women were often like confined and weren't allowed to do a lot of things. And it's so surprising how much choice and respect women had in Norway, even back during the Viking times. Like, they could become a Viking if they wanted to. I don't know. It's very interesting. That's kind of all I keep saying about it, and I feel like that's not my best review of it. But again, I guess this is not necessarily the kind of book that I'm always reading, and so I don't feel capable of giving it. I'm not very good at describing it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I enjoyed it, and I think a lot of people could enjoy it. The love story was very fun, and like you feel immersed in this like culture and this world. And like I said, the audiobook was a really good read. I do think that the pacing is probably a little slower than maybe some other books. Definitely slower than Sky and the Deep, that other Viking book that I talked about. And so I think in that way it makes the audiobook even better because it's something that you can just casually listen to for fun. Because sometimes I know a book that is slower paced is harder to like keep picking up unless you're like really interested in, I don't know, historical fiction stuff. So anyway, I gave that book a 4 out of 5 stars, and then it has a 0.5 out of 5 spicy rating because some spicy scenes do kind of happen, but they only kind of happen, if you know what I mean. Alright, so the next book that we're talking about is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, and it actually has been a minute since I read this book, but it is 100% the kind of book that I want to put in a video like this because this book got me out of a huge reading slump that I was in. So it's called The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. It's based on a Korean fairy tale about a girl who fell beneath the sea. Basically, this story is if you enjoy watching historical K-dramas, you enjoyed Spirited Away. I feel like it is a mixture of those two things because the way that things are described in this book are done in such a magical kind of way that it really made me think of Spirited Away. And then, of course, the love story is kind of like the same tension of a historical K-drama because, you know, it's based in historical times where men and women were supposed to not really be touching each other, of course, but then there's still this pull, this tension between the characters. Our main character, Mina, sacrifices herself so that her brother's beloved does not have to die. Basically, they live in this town that's on the sea, and the sea is been like raging and destroying crops and land and just being very dangerous for a long time. And so the people's way of trying to solve this is they're like, oh, the god of the sea is angry, or he's not doing his job. We need to give him a bride. And so they keep sacrificing beautiful women to the sea so that they can become the sea god's bride. Hopefully things will be fixed, and so Mina's brother's girlfriend is going to be sacrificed, and Mina decides to sacrifice herself instead. And so she goes under the water and she thinks she's going to die, but lo and behold, she gets like taken into this like beautiful underwater kingdom where she meets a sea god, and surprise, surprise, he's an attractive guy. And, you guys can connect the dots from there. The story just really whisks you away. It's kind of one of those books that you can't put down, and it's just so romantic and wonderful, and it'll make you cry, and it'll make you laugh, and it'll make you happy. So this book was one of my 5-star reads of the year. It's a 5 out of 5, and the spicy rating is a 0 out of 5, so I apologize if you were hoping it was going to be spicy, because it ain't. So now we're going to talk about some honorable mentions. I don't know if honorable mentions is the way I want to put it, but we're going to call them that. Okay, so the first of these books is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. I actually wanted to finish this book before I made this video so that I could give it a proper rating and it be like among the books, and I haven't finished it yet, but I wanted to make the video today, so here we are. I'm going to talk about it anyway, even though I honestly am not even halfway through. I'm not going to give it a rating just because I haven't finished it, and I know that sometimes the end of the book can make things crazy. But like, this is one of those books that I've heard so many people talking about. So many people love it, and I get why, even though I'm not yet halfway through with the book. The writer has this like magical way of writing, and it's very immersive, and her characters feel very real. And something interesting about the book that I haven't heard people talk about, I don't think this is a sad book. Something about the way the writer writes is a bit melancholy, and it like pulls on my heartstrings even when things aren't like really, really sad. I'm really enjoying this book so far. I have heard people say V.E. Schwab is like a very slow pace type writer, that her books could be considered boring to some people, and I think I get that. So far it hasn't been like the kind of book that sweeps you away and you don't want to put it down. It's more like the kind of book that every time you pick it up, you're like, wow, that was really nice. But like, you're not like craving to pick it up again. And so I get why people say that it's like she has like a slower pace to her writing. I will tell you the basic synopsis. It's about this girl named Addie Larue, and she has been cursed to not be remembered by anyone, which sucks, but it sucks even more for her because she also doesn't die or age. She's been alive for like hundreds of years and nobody can remember her. And it's not just like, oh, my boyfriend for 10 years can't remember me. It's like if she's talking to somebody and then door closes between them and they can't see her anymore, they're like erased from her memory, or erased from their memory. So she like can't make friends with anybody. She can't make relationships with anybody. She's screwed. And then one day there's someone who magically does remember her. And that's the beginning of things. Yeah, like I said, I have been really enjoying it so far. I have this feeling, even though I haven't heard anybody say it's a really sad book, I have this feeling that this book is gonna make me bawl. And I don't know if it's just because the writer writes in a melancholy way or if like it's actually gonna be, I don't know. So we'll see. And the next book that I wanted to read for this series that I haven't even touched is this book, Babel by R.F. Kuang. She is one of the best writers of our time, or so I've heard. Again, I haven't read any of her books. She also wrote The Poppy Wars, and she also wrote this book called Yellowface, which are all three of these books are really popular. So basically, I need to read this book, and I haven't because I'm scared and intimidated, even though I am like so certain I'm going to love this book. Everything I know about this book tells me that I am going to love this book. Like, this book has to do with Oxford University, and I have always wanted to move to the UK. Maybe someday I will. And it follows a character who's from China. I haven't talked any about this on my channel so far, but I studied Chinese in college and I lived in China for 2 years, so I have a lot of connections to China. I have already mentioned once in this story that I'm a linguist, and this book has a lot of linguistic edges to it. I've heard that it's very academic, so maybe in that way it can be a little hard to read, but also at the same time, I imagine that it's not, because it's like this story that... Also, can we look at Rebecca F. Kuang? She's like freaking beautiful. Okay, it's not important, but just a side note. Like I said, I'm terrified to read this book because what if it's not good? And I've owned it for so long and had such high expectations for it, and what if it's not good? And also, for some reason, I keep seeing videos of people reading it and they're like bawling their eyes out at the end, and I don't know if I want to commit to that kind of emotional strife. And so that's how I feel about Babel and Arcane history. But if you're braver than me, please read it and tell me. And you know what? I think what I'm probably going to do is make a reading vlog about it someday. Maybe one of these upcoming months. I will sit down and read it, and I'm going to make a reading vlog to post on YouTube so you guys can experience the turmoil with me. But I am honestly, without having read a single word of this book, so certain that I'm going to enjoy it, but maybe I won't. I'm going to use that as a segue into saying next month, which will be the month that I release the video. So this month is the month that I'm reading it. I'm doing a reading vlog on Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This is the second book to Fourth Wing, the very, very popular book that came out, which is gonna be A Court of Thorns and Roses predecessor, I predict. Yeah, Iron Flame is book 2, and the book has been out for a month or so now. But I'm gonna do a reading vlog of my experience and my expectations and how things are going, and see how that goes, and see if I enjoy making reading vlogs or not, because I haven't made one of those before. So look out for that next month. I'm really excited to share that with you guys. In the meantime, I'm really happy that I got to share all of these books with you. I hope that any one of them could help you get out of a reading slump. And if you have any more recommendations for books for me to read, I would love to hear them, because I'm always needing more books to read. So thank you so much, and I'll see you guys again next month.